So I kind of wanted to start a little bit around your path. You grew up in Silicon Valley. You played basketball for nearly 17 years. It seems a little bit inevitable that sports and technology were going to converge in your life at some point. But I know that the living of it hasn't necessarily been as straightforward as that might sound. So if you can tell us a little bit about, how you got to your role at Cisco, how you got to founding the two businesses that you've started, that would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it starts with the fact that both of my parents had worked in the technology industry. My mom worked at Cisco for over 22 years. So I grew up what they call a Cisco baby. I remember vividly doing her PowerPoint presentations when I was in middle school and elementary school, and also preparing her for her presentations because she said one too many times for my liking. So I was like her coach. Imagine like a 9-year-old coach telling you how to present to your executives. And then my dad is a computer specialist or the computer tech at the VA hospital. He's a veteran. And so for me, life was all around basketball and sports. However, I was immersed heavily in technology with both of my parents being minorities in tech, me growing up in between the headquarters of Facebook and Google, the schools that I went to, heavily tech focused. So I think that it was kind of a match made in heaven for me to end up working in tech and also being an advocate for diversity and inclusion in tech and representation in tech, especially with me and my journey from an athlete to now a technology professional.
Let's double down for a second, and I'm going to come back to the diversity and tech component, but let's double down on the entrepreneurship piece. Where have you found the most support? You've talked about positive disruption. Where do you pull your commitment to that?
I honestly pull a lot of support from one, I think the group of individuals I'm serving. I didn't know much about working in tech until I started working in tech myself and realizing the amazing roles that were available. And I also have had so many amazing mentors since I've been at Cisco. And then also when I went to Santa Clara and got my MBA, I had a whole lot of amazing mentors and support as well. So I always say it's really important to have kind of like a board of directors, people in your life that support you in different ways, right? Some people might help you on the business standpoint and some might help you with personal, but I've really been able to find really some amazing supporters at Cisco, and even feeling comfortable enough to talk about my passions outside of Cisco. Usually I know individuals when they are entrepreneurs and they also work full time at their company, they're sometimes hesitant to talk about what they do outside of their full-time job because some can look at it as maybe a distraction or an opportunity to take away from their full-time job. But once I start talking about the work that I'm doing, everyone's like, this is amazing. And essentially I'm helping the community that I will always be a part of, which is the athletic community, and bridging that gap between the athlete community and then the technology community.
You talk about the mentorship and the board of directors, and I find that really fascinating. I mean, the tech industry, there's no secret. There have been a lot of challenges when it comes to D&I. That has practical implications, frankly, even in the product development and things like that we've seen. Have you, over the course of your career, when you first started in tech to now, like, how have you seen that evolve? How is your experience even just, you mentioned being like the youngest one in the room, the only Black woman in the room. Like, how is that changing?
It's not changing as much as I would like for it to change, which is why I am working every day to be the difference that I want to see. When I realized I was usually the only woman of color, the only millennial, definitely probably the only athlete. And then when you put all those together, I'm like a unicorn. And I really was tired of it. I think at first it made me feel special, like, wow, look at what I have accomplished. But then it made me realize, there's a whole list of amazing talent out there in the world. And I think that organizations just need to lean in and figure out where do we find the diverse talent. And that's how I've been able to bridge the gap between my company, Shakeout, and Cisco. One of the things that I'm doing is working on creating a pipeline of athletes to come and work at Cisco. So that way I'm not the only one in the room that looks like me or has had experience like the ones that I've experienced.
The talent pipeline is obviously key. If there were two other things that you could say to sort of leaders across the tech industry, like, look, these are the three things. Building the diverse talent pipeline. What are 2 and 3?
I would say it's building the pipeline, also educating the organization as a whole. How do you then integrate that pipeline? And then I think three, what are the trainings or the curriculums or the career advancement opportunities for that pipeline? Step one is getting them to the company. Step two is then training them. And then step three is getting them to a leadership position. When we talk about the turnover in DEI, if you ask me, it's because there's a small amount of executives that are of color. But if we create a pipeline of diverse candidates, we educate them, we train them, we empower them, those entry-level employees then become mid-employees, then managers, right? And then leaders at companies. So I think the pipeline is number one. Number two is educating the whole system around them. And number three, making sure that there's career advancement opportunities. And I'll throw in a fourth. It's really, for me, it's leaning in. When you have someone that is disrupting the way that things are used to being done, listen to them, invest in them, hear them out. I will say that has sometimes been one of my challenges, whereas I've had a lot of amazing mentorship since I've been at Cisco, but I've also ran across a lot of roadblocks where I'm doing amazing stuff. And, I reach out to a manager, I reach out to someone, and it's like going on deaf ears. And that can be really discouraging, especially for a minority trying to disrupt and change and make the world that we live in a better place, and also making the technology a better place. It makes me feel sometimes disheartened. Like, we need to do more. We need to listen when we have young leaders disrupting and making positive impacts.
Positive disruption. I am so here for it. We'll have another conversation separately. I'll tell you my whole life story, but I wanna dive in a little bit to something that you talked about in terms of figuring out, how you could uniquely impact the world around you. You talked about struggling to figure out sort of who you were once you stopped playing basketball, and that really resonated with me because I feel like in the conversation around hybrid work and work-life balance, which Cisco is obviously a huge part of the question that people are asking is, should I really be defining myself based on what I do for a living and how productive I am? Is that really like the sum total of who I am? So I would love to hear sort of how you navigated that and how you advise other people to think about the role that work plays in their sense of self.
Yeah, I think that when I stopped playing basketball for so long, I was known as Classye James, the basketball player. So when people would ask me like, who are you, what do you do essentially, when I was no longer playing basketball, I had no idea. I didn't know who I was, what I stood for, what I was passionate about, what I was good at. And so it took a lot of self work for me to uncover, okay, when I remove any title from me, who is Classye James and what do I love to do? And I also look at it in the standpoint of, if I had all of the financial abundance in the world, what would I want to do with my free time? And then when I started to deep dive on that, I started to realize, what do I love to do? I love helping people. That is just like my number one thing. I love helping people, and I love an underdog. I love, love, love a good underdog story because that is my story. And so I realized that who I am, it wasn't defined by me being a CEO of my own company or me working for the number one place to work, Cisco Systems. It was more so making sure I'm aligning myself with the work that best serves me as an individual. And that's what I'm doing at Cisco today. And that's also what I'm doing with my company.
I love the combination and the intersection of those two things, and want to keep drilling down on it. Shakeout is obviously focused on helping athletes prepare for life after sports. You've talked about, the communities that you want to serve. And I think it's also happening at an interesting time, right? There's a lot of change going on in high school sports and college sports that at least is partially driven by this notion of how do we bring more equity and inclusion into the system, right? Because there's some disproportionate power dynamics. So why do you think that infrastructure to help athletes succeed after their careers are over in terms of sports has been so lacking? And what do you see? Like, I know you launched an app. What is the role of technology in helping to build some of those missing support systems?
Yeah, I would first look at it that we look at athletes. There's like a 6-degree separation from everyone in an athlete, whether it's high school, collegiate, professional. Either an athlete, you're married to an athlete, your child's an athlete, your friend's an athlete. But there is, I feel like potentially a bias or an assumption that athletes have everything handed to them. That life of an athlete is very easy, especially when you're at that collegiate level. There's the assumption that all you have to do is just play your sport and go to school. They have, and those people that aren't athletes have no idea what we're juggling. And then also, they don't realize because we dedicated the majority of our life to our sport, we have not really had the capacity or the time to dive deeper on other things that we're good at or interested in. And so when an athlete then transitions out or they simply just graduate, they have nothing on their resume and there is a lack of support. They're essentially trying to figure out life on their own. And so that's probably the hardest thing. And I've talked to all of the big conferences from the ACC, the SEC, the Pac-12, the Big Ten, and talking to them, they let me know that, one, we have the resources available for athletes, but they don't take advantage of them. And so that's probably the hugest pain point when it comes to collegiate athletics. But to your second point about the technology and the app and stuff that I have, I wanted to, one, make the resources easily accessible to them where they can access them at any given moment. To be honest with you, these athletes are really young. When they get out of college, they're around like 19 and 20. They're still figuring out who they are as people. While they're in college, they're simply trying to play their sport, pass their grades, and maintain some type of normal social life because they're in college. And so I think that when you have the resources always available for them, then it makes it easier for them to access them when they want to access them versus forcing it down their throats when they might not be in the place to receive the information. And so that's kind of what I'm doing with my application and also with my event is I understand that current athletes are focused on one thing, but it's the former athletes that really realize, wow, what Classye is doing for our community is so important because it was hard for me to find a job, or it still is hard for me to find a job. And I think that's the beauty of technology. Most technology you can access, from your fingertips versus, I have to wait once a year for a workshop or once a year for a conference. It's more so like, I know exactly where I need to go to get the resources that I need. And that's what I wanted to do with my company.
I love your 6 degrees of separation because my dad is also an athlete. He's a runner.
See?
I'm telling you, it holds true. I think what's interesting about what you said there is this notion of flexibility, right? And I know that's key at Cisco. It makes me wonder, what are some of the other things that you've taken from your sports career that you're applying to your work within Cisco?
Okay, so it's pretty hilarious because there was a quote by Michael Jordan saying that like you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take, right? So I just am always shooting my shot. I am always shooting my shot. And I have reached out to executives at Cisco pitching, hey, my name is Classye. I love working at Cisco. And I also am doing this amazing work for athletes outside of Cisco. Like, how can I integrate the two, or how can you support me? And sometimes I don't get any response back, but then sometimes I get the best responses back. And so the thing that I learned, I think that I'm applying the most at my job at Cisco is you have to take your shot. You're going to miss, but if you don't take the shot, you're definitely not going to score, right? So I think I use that mentality a lot when I'm trying to disrupt the way that we're doing things at Cisco, or when I have a really creative idea that might sound incredibly crazy to the average person, but I just at least put myself out there.
Love that. I want us to change gears a little bit and talk about Juneteenth.
Okay.
Because I think, which I'm changing gears quite a lot actually, but bear with me. There's been some really interesting dialogue around Juneteenth in the last sort of week and a half, which I'm sure you've been tracking.
Yeah.
I think it just is a reminder for all of us, in case there was any doubt, that no one community is a monolith, right? Like, everybody has a whole intersection of identities and experiences that shape how they see the world. So was Juneteenth a part of your experience and your family traditions growing up? How has your relationship to this day evolved, if at all?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, being from Silicon Valley, like I remember my dad used to take me to Juneteenth festivals down in Oakland, and it was a way for us to celebrate who we were and who we are as Black people. I just remember just having so much fun, eating good food, but not really realizing like why we're, having these amazing celebrations. It wasn't until I was older that my parents, started to talk to me about what Juneteenth means to me as a young Black child at the time. But to be honest with you, being from Silicon Valley, you're in a bubble. Yeah, some of my best friends, like, we're all of different races. And so for me, I never really experienced racism or witnessed it at a high level until I moved to the South. Now, I relocated to Atlanta in 2019, right before what happened with George Floyd in 2020. And that made me lean in a lot more to what's happening with Black people. That made me lean in more and to learn more about Juneteenth and why it's so important. And also because of what my ancestors went through and what they fought for, I'm able to be a Black woman in tech. I'm able to be an entrepreneur. I'm able to advocate for the things that mean the most to me in a safe environment, where I'm sure years ago, there were plenty of people that felt the way that I feel when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. But if they said something, their lives could be at risk. And so I look at Juneteenth as not just the celebration of the ending of slavery, but I look at it as a way to pay tribute to my ancestors, because without what they went through, without the risks that they took, I wouldn't be in the position that I'm in today.
Do you find that there's a sense of a sense or a feeling of responsibility that comes along with that, and maybe also sort of ties into the notion of being, a woman in tech and sort of blazing some of the trails that you're blazing?
I do feel a sense of responsibility. I also always put too much pressure on myself. For me, I look at it like 2020 was a hard year for everyone. I lost two of the most important women in my life. I lost my great grandmother, who was almost 100 years old, and I also lost my grandmother, who was in her 70s. And for my great grandmother, I remember before she had dementia, having conversations with her because she grew up in Georgia, and, had to pick cotton. And so to have those conversations in my life, I feel like I have a huge responsibility. I feel like for me personally, it's disrespectful to my great grandmother and to my ancestors to not put my best foot forward in everything that I do, because to be honest with you, the work that I'm doing is far easier than the work that she had to do.
Facts. Is there anything I recognize we're going to come up to time soon. Is there anything we haven't talked about in the context of the work you're doing at Cisco, how that kind of connects to some of the other passions in your life that you want to share?
Not necessarily. I will just say, like, I continuously give kudos and respect to Cisco for allowing me to be my true authentic self at work. I don't have to hide the fact that I'm a former athlete or hide the fact that I have an organization outside of Cisco that is, making the world a better place. Whereas a lot of, aspiring entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs feel like they don't have the support of their companies. I feel like, again, I'm a unicorn in that sense, that I'm a part of an amazing organization that not only invests in me as a person, but also sees the benefits of investing in the amazing things that I'm doing for athletes.